And thank you all for being here. I know we've still got some people filtering in, but I'm sure they'll all make it in. But like I said, thank you for being here. This is going to be a great session today. I know Matthew always does a great job, and I love getting to work with Matthew because he is really a group policy guru. So I know I learn something every time we work together. So this should be great. Uh, just a little housekeeping. Like Katie said, we are recording, so everyone here will receive the recording after the webcast. And if you do have questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we can get to them either throughout or by the end. Or if you do want to come off mute to ask your question, you're welcome to raise your hand, and we can get to you. So, but if that's it, I think I'll go ahead and hand things over to Matthew to get started. So take it away.
Right on. Thanks, Evan. So today we're going to be talking about group policy, and I want to let you know a little bit what we're going to get into, but beforehand, just so you don't freak out. This is going to be a pretty 301 kind of group policy discussion. So we are going to be going a little bit beyond where you'd normally go when it comes to talking about securing group policy. Now, this is specifically understanding group policy as a system that needs to be secured, as a potential chink in your armor, not necessarily how to use group policy to increase security. That's a whole nother conversation. First off, just a quick intro who I am. So I'm just a complete Active Directory nerd. And I specifically find group policy really interesting. It's for a whole variety of reasons, but a lot of it's just exposure to some really interesting sort of group policy environments amongst my customers and amongst the research that I do. But I'm a pre-sales engineer here at Quest, which means that, and specifically, I work with some of our largest and most complex customers. So that's where a lot of like these concepts come from. And I'm super excited to be talking with them, with you today. Another quick word, though, as we start to talk about what we're going to be talking about, there will be links in the chat. So there are like several places where you'll see that there's places to go for more information. So I'd highly recommend, checking those out, go in and take a look at some of the sources that I use. But today we're going to be structured into kind of 3 sections. Firstly, I'm going to start with foundations. And again, this isn't just really okay, well, what is group policy kind of thing, but I think it's useful to start with like, okay, what are the components? What are they actually called? How do they work? I know even myself who works with this all the time, sometimes the terminology gets a little weird, and some of that becomes really important later on. So we're going to take these foundations, we're going to build on it. So if you are a group policy expert, just hold tight through that, and then we're going to get to some really interesting stuff, because we're going to talk about 2 kind of advanced techniques that really push group policy to its limits. And we're actually going to look, and I've got actual like video recordings of going through these, I kind of call them exploits, if you will, certainly abuses of group policy. So you'll actually be able to see this stuff in motion rather than just static slides. All right, and before we get kicked off on that, though, I want to acknowledge, like, I'm just mostly a good researcher. So both of these particularly advanced techniques, we'll talk about where they come from when we get to each of those sections. But yeah, there's people far smarter than me whose research I'm using here. And again, you'll have links to their actual source blogs on each of those as we get to those. Firstly, kind of why should I care about this? Now, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but group policy as an aspect of Active Directory is kind of under like routine exploit from attackers. It is one of the attackers, particularly ransomware gangs' favorite systems for particularly establishing dominance within Active Directory. There's I absolutely love this example. I've got a screenshot of it, and the link is actually in chat, but the what's called like Mango Sandstorm, I think is what Microsoft codenamed it. It was a nation state attack, and this one is fascinating because it involves going through on-premises Active Directory, leveraging group policy to establish dominance, and then extending that dominance into the cloud. So really, really cool stuff. All that to say is that group policy is really important, and we're going to discuss technically why that is kind of throughout this, but this is why you should care. It's attackers love it, and so understanding it really well in order to defend it, absolutely huge. All right, well, let's start in with our fundamentals. Again, there's a great link here. Our wonderful, partners and friends over at SpectreOps have a phenomenal blog which goes over a lot of the same materials. So if you want to check that out, definitely do so. But from a fundamental basis, what is group policy? Like we all kind of know generally, it's a system to go in and to set settings, but at its core, it's a systems management technique. Microsoft, back in the 90s and early 2000s, Microsoft was kind of a little notorious for this. They would take an open standard, something like LDAP, and they would make an LDAP adjacent system that extended. They called it embrace and extend, and maybe embrace, extend, and extinguish. So with Active Directory, of course, you took that LDAP foundation and you added Kerberos for authentication, cool stuff. And then they added in like this neat systems management capability. That systems management capability is group policy. So group policy at a technical level, again, it is in every installation of Active Directory. So this is one of the reasons why attackers love it so much, is that it's ubiquitous. If you're trying to take over Active Directory, that's going to be there. You don't have to say, okay, well, here I've got a technique for SCCM and a technique for Big Fix or whatever. Nope. Group policy, it's going to be there. So what is group policy? So group policy from a technical level has an Active Directory object. So just like a user or a group or something like that, it has something called a group policy container. So you can see a little screenshot of that there, of what that looks like within ADSI Edit. So the group policy container is an Active Directory object, and it has its own security that's applied to it. And it's got some information in it, and we're going to talk about what that is here in a few minutes. But then the actual settings within group policy are stored in a file system object. Those are known as a group policy template. I have no idea why it's called template. It's not a template at any rate. But that's where the actual settings are, and they're stored in sysvol, in a file system object. So that's two of the components to it. Then what gets determined around where group policy gets applied are link attributes that are set on scopes of management. When I say scopes of management, I mean organizational units primarily, but it could also be the domain head object, and it could also be Active Directory sites. All of those can contain this GP link and GP options link attributes. So those are things. So basically where group policy is applied to isn't a function of the group policy itself, but it's a function of OUs. And then of course, the logic, the thing that makes all this stuff go, are a set of client components. So, Active Directory doesn't push, it makes this stuff available, and these clients that are joined Active Directory actually have the logic for that. So digging in even a little bit more, this can become important later. So don't zone out. So group policy links, they are defined by two things, two attributes that again are on OUs domains, like I mentioned earlier, GP link and GP options. GP link is probably the most critical one. This is the actual pointer to the group policy container that's in the system container within system policies within the default Active Directory partition. GP options is interesting too, but that's where if you've ever worked with group policy and you say click like enforced or whatnot, that's GP options what actually contains that option. But the GP link, that is where the pointers are, and it's actually a really silly field, and you'll see this a little bit later on, so we're going to mess with it. But it's literally just like a text string that has text and then like a semicolon and more text. It is as simple as that. It's not even a multi-valued attribute. But GP link, really important. All right, and then we have to talk about the client. Like I mentioned earlier, this is where all the real logic of group policy actually is. This is where it's driven from. So these configurations that are set through group policy, they're processed by a SVC host.exe that basically has some separate modules of those, which actually makes it a little bit difficult to like just pop up Task Manager and see when a client is processing group policy because, well, it's just an SVC host. So you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper into that. You can see here, I think I pulled this from Process Monitor. There's a screenshot there of what an actual group policy process looks like. And there's actually multiple DLLs that it can call, but those two, the GP SVC and GP Pref CL, are the most common. They are traditional group policy and group policy preferences, respectively. Now, the important thing that I want you to know here, though, is the stuff executes as system by default. So it's like local system that's running these. So that is, by default, the security context of anything that occurs through group policy. All this stuff, like anything of application, that gets logged, like when group policy applies to a client, that gets logged into one of the deep event logs, which is the Microsoft Windows group policy operational log. We're going to take a look at that later. You can see a little preview of it here. All right. So then every 90 minutes, give or take a randomized 30-minute sort of interval. So, you don't get in a situation where all the clients are hitting group policy all at once. A client will then read all sort of GP link and GP options of the OU or domain and site where the computer and logged in users are in. So it'll actually like looking at a couple different places and it sort of enumerates those out of Active Directory. So if it finds an enabled policy, it's going to go ahead and follow that link to the group policy container. It's going to then check that group policy container and make sure that it has the apply to rights. So if you've ever set a group policy and said, all right, well, this is not going to apply to authenticated users, but rather it's going to apply to this specific group, that's where that check occurs. And then if it passes all those, it's going to process, it's going to follow the group, it's going to follow the link that's in the group policy container to the group policy template within Sysvol, and it's going to read that information. It's going to follow the instructions that it finds there. So that is the mechanics group policy. And again, I suspect for some of you that's going to be old news, but again, I wanted to really set a baseline here because it's going to help understand what we're going to look at here next. But from a fundamental perspective, I've kind of made note of this already, but group policy, it can really do just about anything. In my research, I find that attackers generally prefer to use the immediate scheduled task. Immediate scheduled task is kind of neat from an attacker basis for a couple reasons. One of those is you can basically set it to run a system, or if you apply to a user, you can have it run under the local user's context, which could be useful, particularly if you want to leverage that user's Active Directory rights. But again, I think it's more common to run whatever into system so you can deploy Mimikatz or whatnot and start dumping credentials out of memory. The other neat thing about leveraging scheduled tasks, immediate scheduled tasks specifically, is that as soon as they run, it just like removes the scheduled task. So it makes it kind of obfuscates what's going on because it's just like pushes it, runs it, and it's gone. So again, a really, really nice way of running anything on an affected client that has essentially unlimited privilege within that client boundary. Wonderful, wonderful technique for lateral movement because, again, you can kind of find other systems that might have an interesting logged in user. You go and you can run, credential dumping techniques right out of memory. Beautiful thing. All right. Lastly, we're going to talk about, this is what I consider to be kind of protecting GPOs 201. So again, I mentioned this is going to be kind of a 301 conversation today. We're going to really push group policy to its limit, but just know that like these three things are things that I highly recommend any organization does. Like this is the baseline of protecting group policy. And again, I could probably do an entire session on these. I probably have in the past, but But there's like 3 things that you should do, just as, again, as a baseline. One of those things is, analyze your delegations. So delegations, there's, any time that you have like group policy that might be delegated out to a non-privileged user, that can be really problematic. Those analyzing those delegation pathways is something that's built into something like Bloodhound. You can also just sort of, particularly if your environment isn't too large, you can go through those. Look, a lot of organizations have group policy left as default, where you've got it's basically only your domain admins and enterprise admins that can work with those. Regardless, analyze that, understand who can do what with those. But probably the biggie, because analyzing delegations is great, but if someone has, say, compromised an administrative account and is leveraging group policy to establish long-term dominance over an environment, like that's the example that occurred within that Mango Sandstorm attack, then delegations don't really matter. They already have privilege within an environment. It's all about then sort of applying settings, disabling EDR software, deploying ransomware, all that. That's where auditing group policy is really important. Auditing group policy is like something that Microsoft doesn't do well natively at all. So I don't know if you've ever noticed, but you can see that a group policy changed, but it will only reference it like by the GUID, which isn't super useful, and you can't actually see what changed within it. So it's really, really difficult to catch a bad change while it's occurring. But there's some really good software out there. Quest makes one of those that actually provides visibility. And that's going to become important later, because we're going to talk about how to evade that. And then finally, anytime that you're working with group policy, you're kind of working without a net a little bit. So create lots of backups. Use Active Directory backup solutions or some kind of version control system for group policy. These are all like really good fundamental things. But let's say you've done all that. Let's take it to a next level. Let's say that you've done that and an attacker is looking at your network and figuring out what they want to do with it. So now we're going to dive deep. First technique we're going to talk about is evading that auditing that we just spoke to. So again, software that audits group policy changes does so by looking at the actual file system changes that are occurring in the group policy template. Remember that template is what contains the actual settings that are being set in group policy. So if you want to know that, oh, hey, someone modified a group policy object to run an immediate scheduled task, well, you have to look at that file system object. So let's say that you're an attacker and you'd prefer not to be seen. You might know, or you might just guess that, your target has systems in place to be able to audit group policy. And attackers, they hate being audited. Like, they want to do what they want to do, and they're trying to make as little waves as possible. So fortunately for attackers, group policy isn't actually that choosy about where it finds its group policy templates. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to do this in 2 steps here. You're actually going to see us step through. So in order to evade this auditing, we're going to create a group policy sort of offline in an environment that I, as the attacker, control. We're going to zip that up, and we're going to take some notes of that. So let's actually take a look at that. I'm going to, so these are actual recordings of me doing this. So you'll see occasional mouse foibles and whatnot, but I want you to kind of know what you're seeing here. So here's an environment that I control. This is a domain, and there is a group policy here that contains settings that I want to leverage. There's a scheduled task within it. So what I did is I took note of the GUID of that, and I went into sysvol here. I'm sorry, I went into ADSI edit, and I'm going to take another note. And these are extensions. So extensions are essentially how group policy knows which of those modules to use to process it, and they do need to match. So you get that information out of the source environment. Then all we need to do is we're going to zip up the actual group policy template. We're going to put it into a zip folder. You can see it's just there with the template name, and we're gonna pull that out of the sysvol I control, and then we are going to then in our next step leverage it. So that's kind of the setup. Let's talk about what happens next. So in my target environment, the environment that I'm targeting, I'm going to create a share on a computer that I control, and I'm going to unpack that group policy template into there. I'm going to set the correct permissions so that the clients can actually access that. And then I'm going to modify an existing group policy container. So this is, and we're going to point to that. Now, really important, if you're being eagle-eyed here, this is a technique to avoid detection. It presumes that I already have control over a group policy. Like I could edit that group policy directly using GPMC. I just don't want to because that's going to set off alarm bells. I want to do this sneakily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage my control over the group policy container. I'm going to point it at my offline group policy template. So let's watch. So we can see here, I'm now in my target environment. I'm going to create a folder here. I'm going to call it sysvol. It's my fake sysvol. And I'm going to create a new share. This is just an ordinary Windows share. Again, our group policy clients are kind of dumb. They're going to be happy with this. So we're going to create a new share. And we're going to set, again, the appropriate permissions on this share to make sure that incoming clients can access it. That's a relatively straightforward thing to do. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that zip file that I have copied from my source environment. We're going to take the contents of that, which again is just a folder with some files in it. We're going to take that, we're going to put that in that share. And now clients can access it. Our last step is we just need to tell them to do so. So we have a path, and we are going to, I'm actually going to switch to the UNC version of that because I want to actually capture this path, how clients are going to see it. So we're going to copy this. Then we're going to go into ADSI edit, and we're going to modify the group policy container. So then here I have my group policy container. Now you're seeing a whole bunch of GUIDs here. The interesting thing is none of the stuff needs to match. It's like totally cool. It'll do whatever. So we're going to add that path into there. And then we're going to take those extensions that we copied because the client needs to know what DLLs it needs to load to actually process this. And we're going to paste those in there. So we have just two elements that we've modified here. Two elements that, by the way, are not typically audited. We're going to talk about that later. And voila, now we have a situation where whatever I put in that group policy template, clients are going to happily follow it. I actually considered recording a little video that shows that, but you're going to see that here on our next example too. So I didn't want to be redundant, but yeah, absolutely. The group policy client will look at the container within Active Directory. It'll then say, oh, where's the group policy template? It will then follow that to this workstation and process whatever. And again, here's the thing. Auditing software that's loaded on domain controllers to audit group policy, none the wiser. It can't see any of this because actual settings are being produced on a system that I control. So that's the first example. I thought that was pretty cool. Again, this was something that Darren, I'm gonna always mess up his name, Darren Marelia, something that he kind of wrote in his blog. There's a link to it. Definitely check that out. The dude is an amazing group policy expert. He makes me look like a novice. Anyway, this is a pretty well-known technique and something that I kind of wanted to surface to you all. The next one was what I thought was really interesting. Now, this is something that I had actually I had come across in sort of normal security research that I do year to year, and was sort of like this half remembered memory. So when I was sort of preparing the abstract for this talk, I'm like, that sounds interesting, but did I remember it? And it took me a while to research this and figure out like a good source for that, but I did find a good source. It's actually someone that I know. So that link is in the link there. So Mark Amash, amazing engineer. Um, so this is an interesting technique, and I think even more interesting than the last one. So with the last one, if you remember, it was a good way to avoid being audited within group policy. But what if you don't have domain dominance? Like that last one, again, you could have just fired up GPMC with whatever account. You could have made those changes if you wanted to. But let's say that you don't have those rights. Let's say that you only have rights against no you. So what could you do? Like you don't have any rights over any group policies that are in there. You might not have administrative rights to the domain at all, but maybe you found an account that has delegations, full delegations over an OU. And that OU contains users or computers that you might be interested in working with. Again, well, obviously you could, because remember, the OU contains the GP link and GP options attribute. So you could go in there and say, well, wipe those out and maybe reduce security, but that's it's kind of a long shot. It's probably not going to help you do what you want to do. But less obviously, and again, if you use this technique, you can do anything by only having control over GP link and GP options. So let's check that out. All right, so this one is a little bit more complex, but we're going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to talk through what we're going to do, and you're going to see it done. So firstly, we're going to create a shadow Active Directory in ADLDS that GP link is going to point to. So what we're going to need to do now, it is important that this computer, whatever an attacker is using, be domain joined. Not usually a hard lift, but domain joined because it's going to need a service principal name in order for a group policy client to use it. We're going to install the ADLDS role on a domain joined computer. Then we're going to create an application partition with a specific sort of naming scheme. So you can see here in my lab what that naming scheme was. DC equals net, DC equals Vinton Labs, which is my domain, DC equals my computer name. Then, because ADLDS is kind of a blank slate, if you will, we're going to import an Active Directory-like schema that Microsoft just includes with everything, right? So we're going to do this. Here's a command that I used to import that. Again, pretty trivial thing to do. And again, that's just going to put the correct classes and things like that we're going to use here in a second. All right, so that's my preparation one. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add the domain user, domain computer, domain controllers to the reader role because, again, they're going to need to read ADLDS. We're going to create a system policies container in the app partition of the partition, again, that we created in ADLDS. And then we're going to create a group policy container in policies. That this is, where in the last example we modified one, we're going to create one out of whole cloth here that points to, again, a location that I control. So let's check it out. All right, so what we can see here is, I have my little exported zip file just like I did before, and I'm going to go ahead and then, grab that because it's not actually necessary to use the same GUID, but I'm like, well, I might as well. So I'm going to go ahead then and create that group policy container object. Again, the reason why that's in that list is because of the schema that I imported. So we're just going to give it the same kind of GUID name here. And then we're going to go into that object. We're going to make some changes to it. There's only like, 3 or 4 things that we actually need to do. File system path, just like the last little exploit thing that we used. The file system path here, we're going to get that by checking out our sysvol location that's offline. So this is, again, just like the last example. Grab that. I'm going to go grab that path. So we're going to get that. Drop that in there. I'm going to make a mistake, and I'm going to do it again. There we go. And then just like before, we're going to get, we have some version information. We get those extensions again, because we do need to tell the clients what they need to load. There's references out there, by the way, if you're interested in what these are. I find it's just easiest to just copy them out of my source environment. It's kind of up to you. So we're going to grab that. And I think there's like one more little like version number that you should put something here. I actually haven't tested whether it's truly necessary, but those are like literally the only things within a group policy container that are required. So now we have created in ADLES a group policy container object. That group policy container object then points to my offline sysvol, my fake sysvol. Now, this kind of close to last step is a tricky one. This is the trickiest thing that is in this entire talk today. When you set up, when you like look inside group policy, there is and you like right to, look at a group policy, and by default, it's going to have authenticated users as having the apply group policy right. That right is that apply group policy. That is actually what they call an extended right within Active Directory. So with AD, you've got like kind of your normal rights, read write, change properties. And then you have like extended rights, things like replicate directory changes, apply group policy, these kind of things. So ADLES is completely unaware of these rights. But again, that actually doesn't matter so much, because all these things are just these extended rights are all just like basically a good reference that the client can understand. So all we have to do is kind of go a little lower level. You can see kind of some of the PowerShell here that I used in order to do that. And we're going to then take and apply that. So this one is a little bit more complicated, a little bit trickier, but completely doable, and specifically doable by an attacker who, unfortunately, that's kind of, they live and breathe this kind of stuff. So we're going to add that apply group policy extended right. And then that's all we need to execute this attack. This is where we actually make a change against Active Directory. We're going to go in, and again, we control an OU, maybe nothing else, but control an OU. We're going to then modify the GP link attribute to point to my ADLES container. Again, the client doesn't care. It's wild. It doesn't check that it's a domain controller. It's perfectly happy as long as it's got a spin and has that right, the correct sort of DN with that. That was why it was so important to put that, DC equals WKS, DC equals blah, blah, blah. As long as it conforms to that, it doesn't actually check whether it's a domain controller. It's just going to follow it. So let's watch. So here again, I've got my information here. I'm going to go ahead and just copy out, just because I'm lazy. I'm going to copy out the distinguished name from ADLES perspective. So that's going to be like the GUID, then comma, DC equals WKS, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm modifying the directory of my target environment. Again, I actually control this OU because I've been granted access to this, or the account that I'm using has been granted access to this. And so what I said before, how this is like an incredibly simple thing here. Yeah, it's just literally GP link. You paste that path in that's pointing to my ADLES, and then it has like a comma and 0 afterwards. That just controls your link order. That's it. That is it. No further validation is done there. So once I have that, that's what happens. So you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and just run a GP update force. That GP update force is going to run a immediate scheduled task that in the sysvol, in the system context, it's going to run that. It's going to drop a little text document there that just says what the just a message and what the context is that it was running under. Now, obviously, that's not what an attacker is going to be doing. Attacker is going to be, probably dropping credentials out of memory, a whole bunch of other fun stuff. But fundamentally, that was that. So I was able to parlay control over an OU to control over the computer object that was in it. And if it had been a user's OU, I could have targeted a user-spaced one as well. That would work totally fine as well. So from a logging standpoint, this is what's going to show up there. Again, there's nothing unusual about this. You'd have to have real eagle eyes, but if you can see here, it says the system calls to access specified file completed. WKS, that's my workstation, policies, $, and then we have my little path, gpt.ini, call completed. It just happily did it. So those are two, what I thought were really interesting ways of pushing group policy to its absolute limit. Now, let's talk about a couple takeaways here as we sort of close. Firstly, how likely is I'm not aware of these actually ever being exploited in the wild. So, as far as how much risk these exploits are, I'm not so sure, but I do know that there is a continual arms race when it comes to protecting Active Directory. The better you get at those fundamentals, and we talked about those fundamentals in kind of phase one, you can audit it, understand your delegations, blah, blah, blah. The better you get at that, the more attackers are going to be pushed to these techniques. And then most fundamentally, this is all about understanding group policy at a deeper level. And I'm hoping that even if this is maybe way in the weeds, that you walk away today with just a little bit better understanding of group policy in general. But if you want some specific guidance, if you're like, well, hey, those actually do seem like pretty reasonable things that I might want to just put the kibosh on from the get-go, there's sort of 3 really specific things that I'd kind of recommend. One of those is, whatever auditing system you're using, add the GPC file sys path to that. So that just means that if someone tries to get sneaky and redirect a file system path in the group policy container, that you know about that. That should be a pretty straightforward thing to do and really shouldn't happen too much. The second one is something that I generally recommend overall, is to keep a close eye on SPN, service principal name changes within your Active Directory environment. One of the things that by installing ADLDS on a workstation, that is actually going to register a spin. That's actually what makes all this work. That's why it had to be a domain join system. You can keep an eye on that with an Active Directory, so you'll be able to see the spin of the computer account actually change. So if it is like LDAP, you might want to take a closer look at that, because it might be someone installing ADLDS for some valid reason, or it might not be. Definitely a good thing to kind of keep an eye on, maybe alert on. And then finally, audit your GP links. This is something that is, and audit the actual GP link attribute kind of at a low level. So this is something you need to audit on the domain head object, Active Directory sites, as well as all OUs. So that way you can see changes there and kind of keep an eye on those. Again, there shouldn't be that many changes, although in larger environments with a significant amount of group policy administrative activity, it might be difficult to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff on that one. But yeah, so that's it. You made it through. I realize this is pretty technical and in the weeds, and I hope I haven't lost too many of y'all. Sort of before we move on to questions and any questions in closing, I do want to give just a little shout out to sort of our next tech talk. I have seen this. Justin Kohler is amazing. He always makes me feel like I've still got a long ways to go as far as both presentation ability and technical ability. This is a fantastic one. So, where we were talking before about looking at group policy as part of an overall sort of attack path, this is kind of the big picture look at that. So I highly recommend, if you found anything interesting here, it's also a really cool technical discussion presentation. I've seen it already. So yeah, totally check that one out. And want to, of course, this is a presentation that I've given already in front of a live audience, which was way more scary than sitting in front of a computer with y'all. And that was it was amazingly successful, and we're looking forward to our next in-person one in Dallas. Literally, if you've got any ability to travel, it's amazing. Had great experiences the last several years that I've had the privilege of contributing to TEC and attending it. But with that, all right, So to come to a close, any questions?
I haven't seen any come in through the chat, but if anybody does have any questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or come off of mute and ask them. We have a little bit of time.
Absolutely. I always appreciate being stumped. All right. Going.
I guess that means you were very thorough.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for, oh, great. So yeah, Carlos, the two exploits, Carlos's question is, for these exploits to work, a hacker would need to have gained DA, right? Not necessarily. So the first one is an attacker would have needed to gain access over a group policy. Now, you could do that through DA. Again, that's probably going to be the case. They probably already established dominance and are looking to stealthily, laterally move using, without making a lot of noise. The second one, no, like that's the one that kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies, because you did not need DA or full domain control over the second one. All you needed is full delegated rights over an OU, which is really common. It is not uncommon at all for people, even people kind of at the business level, to have rights over an OU. Maybe someone did that at one point in time so they could manage groups, or they had a computer object in there that an application owner needed to work with. It's unfortunately a really common type of thing. So that one you could actually use as a privilege escalation technique. The first one is more of a lateral movement evasion type of stuff. And that kind of terminology I'm using right now is pretty much straight out of the MITRE attack matrix. So I should put a link to that in there. Just Google MITRE. Hold on, I'll put it in the chat if I can remember. They spell attack weird. Anyway, so yeah, so the MITRE attack matrix, so if you look, those techniques kind of fulfill different points there. So yeah, half right, half incorrect. Rob, good question. Like, how does Quest Change Auditor help with alerting on these changes? So, I obviously really, overall tech is not a like a, even though it's sponsored by Quest, it's not really like a vendor. We're not pushing stuff, but where I mentioned earlier, visibility, like that 201 discussion, visibility into group policy changes, that's one of the things that's actually really unique that Change Auditor does. And it's something that I recommend, even people with that are more SIEM focused from a security perspective. I'm like, leverage your Change Auditor deployment and feed this information in there, because it's getting audit data that just doesn't exist otherwise. So yeah, a couple of ways that Change Auditor can really help here. Firstly, is it's going to give you the visibility, because it can actually look at those individual changes, so you can see that happening. You can use protection templates within it to actually further lock down. So even like the DA thing, even like the domain admins thing, you can even stymie that. So even if someone gets DA, you can actually protect your group policy. And then all those like specific attributes that I recommended auditing, yeah, you can just throw those into the list within Change Auditor. It's really trivial. You can get that visibility. So yeah, it is a excellent tool for cloaking visibility as well as prevention for these. Ooh, David, I love this question. Has Microsoft ever proposed anything to do more validation on the LDAP clients? So the answer is no. The gentleman, Mark Kamash, who, as far as I know, he's one person who kind of looked and found that that second attack, and I find the more interesting one. So if you look at Mark's LinkedIn, Mark was actually, and this is where I knew him from, was one of the main AD engineers for Microsoft's internal Active Directory. So it's like, again, it's in his LinkedIn. It's not a secret. He's moved on since then. So I know if you take a look at his blog, he's like, he ran it up the flagpole and they're just like, do not fix, will not fix. And I have a theory why. So there are, and I've seen this out in the wild, where there are multi-forest deployments where people are saying, okay, well, I have this group policy and I want it to apply in multiple forests, and I have forest trust and everything like that, but I don't want to have to like try to keep these group policies in sync. It's a technique to actually go and modify the GP link directly to point to a separate forest, and it totally works. So it's the same mechanism that you know, because the clients are dumb, they'll follow anything really. So, and in the same way they'll follow to ADL, yes, they'll follow to a different forest. So I suspect that Microsoft maybe doesn't want to break that, or maybe they just don't think that it's that big of a risk. But yeah, at least last I heard, it was a will not fix. But yeah, check out his blog. He addresses it directly, right? Yeah, I agree. That's like, you know, it's some sort of validation. It's not hard to tell whether a system is a domain controller, and you should be able to do some kind of checks on that, right? But you know, Microsoft is generally not making a lot of changes to Active Directory nowadays anyway. I think they much prefer everyone to sort of scoot up to Enter ID and Intune and all that. So that leaves us in the trenches to keep working and, you know, sort of preventing Mango Sandstorm style attacks. All right. Any other questions before we close? Those were fantastic. Thank you. I was getting worried there. Yep, Markham. It is recorded. Katie, that'll go out to registered attendees, right? The recording.
Yep. We'll get
Sweet.
a recording sent out to you via email, and then it'll also be available on our website within the week.
Rock on. All right. Well, I'll kick it back over to you, Katie, to close this out.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matthew. That was very informative and a lively session there towards the end. We do have a couple more minutes. So while I'm wrapping up, if anybody has a question that pops in your mind, feel free to put it in the chat. But otherwise, I did put the link in for the next Tech Talk next week. So make sure to sign up to register for that one. And the link to register for the in-person experts conference in Dallas next year is in the chat as well. So you have everything you need to come see us in person, and we hope that you do. But with that, everybody have a great day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, everybody.